I want you to picture it. It's the 4th of July.
Okay.
You're hearing the steady roll of snare drums, right? The air smells like cotton candy and black powder. And there's this column of reenactors marching past, wearing the tri-corner hats, carrying muskets.
Classic Americana.
Exactly. But as the national anthem starts playing, you notice nobody is actually putting their hand over their heart.
Oh, wait, really?
Yeah. And the church towering in the background, it isn't some, white steepled New England chapel. It's got these heavy mahogany doors and intricate Baroque carvings that are centuries older than literally any building in America.
Oh, wow. So we're definitely not in Massachusetts.
Not even close. And as the crowd cheers, a volunteer hoists this massive red and yellow striped flag of Spain up the pole to roaring shouts of Viva España.
That is amazing.
Right. You are standing in Macravilla. It's this tiny village high up in the foothills of Andalusia, Spain. And yet this village throws one of the most fervent, historically passionate American Revolutionary War celebrations on the planet.
It's so unexpected.
It really is. And the reason why brings us to today's deep dive. We are cracking open Derek Baxter's book, The Forgotten World War. And our mission here is simple, really. It's to completely shatter the myth you were probably taught in grade school.
Right, that whole lone Minuteman narrative.
Exactly. The idea that American independence was this localized solo effort won by scrappy farmers in New England, it's basically a fiction. We are going to explore the secret, sprawling global web of smugglers, foreign kings, and unexpected allies that actually won the war.
Which is such a wild story.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand how a global network pulled the strings of the American Revolution, we kind of have to start with why that specific Spanish village is throwing a 4th of July party in the first place.
Right.
And it all traces back to one native son, Bernardo de Gálvez.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that Gálvez isn't just a footnote in this story, He is really the structural foundation of the Southern war effort.
Wait, so he was from that village?
Yeah. He started as a shepherd there, actually, and he rapidly climbed the ranks to become the Spanish governor of Louisiana. So, operating out of New Orleans, he ran this massive covert supply line, just smuggling desperately needed munitions up the Mississippi River to American troops.
Wow.
But he was much more than just a quartermaster. I mean, he was an aggressive, brilliant tactician who fundamentally altered British troop deployments.
Which Baxter illustrates perfectly, right? Like, when he describes that village pageant, they actually reenact the Battle of Pensacola.
Oh, right, Pensacola. That was huge.
Yeah, it was Britain's most critical stronghold in the Gulf of Mexico. So Gálvez puts together this wildly diverse coalition. You've got Spanish regulars, French soldiers, and free black militias from Louisiana, and he sails them toward the British fort.
But there's a catch, right? To get into the bay, they have to cross this really treacherous, shallow sandbar.
Exactly. And the Spanish naval commanders, they take one look at the British cannons aimed right at that bottleneck, and they refuse. Like, flat out refuse. They are terrified of getting their ships grounded and just shredded to pieces.
Yeah, and that hesitation sets up, honestly, one of the most cinematic moments of the entire war.
Oh, I love this part.
Gálvez is absolutely furious at the Navy's cowardice. So he boards his own personal sloop, stands on the deck holding a cannonball high in the air, and just screams, "Yo, Solo! I alone!"
I alone, that is so intense.
Right. He orders his small ship straight over the sandbar, directly into the teeth of the British guns, and he survives the crossing. And by doing so, he completely shames the rest of the naval fleet into following him.
It's the ultimate leadership flex. Like, you can't not follow a guy who does that.
Totally.
So they lay siege to the fort for 2 agonizing months until, get this, a lucky Spanish mortar shell happens to drop right into the British powder magazine.
Just boom.
Massive explosion, Pensacola falls. And Baxter makes it really clear this wasn't just some minor skirmish in a swamp. By taking the Gulf, Gálvez tied up British ships and regiments that otherwise would have been sent up the coast to fight George Washington.
Which was critical.
Yeah, that direct diversion of British power is what enabled the decisive American victory at Yorktown later that year.
And the ripples of that history are still incredibly tangible today, even on a deeply personal level for the author.
Oh, yeah. The author's research journey is almost as surreal as the war itself. Like, Baxter is in Spain watching this Pensacola reenactment, and this guy walks out of the theatrical smoke looking exactly like the historical portraits of Bernardo de Gálvez.
Uncanny, right?
And it turns out he is Jose Gálvez. He's a criminal defense attorney, a passionate reenactor, and a direct descendant of the governor.
That's wild.
They strike up a conversation, and a week later, Baxter and his Cuban-American wife, Liana, are standing by a pool in Marbella overlooking the Mediterranean. They are drinking wine, eating goat cheese, and stirring a massive iron pot of paella with chunks of chorizo alongside the Gálvez family.
It's such a remarkable image. I mean, it really highlights the enduring cross-cultural bonds that this conflict forged.
It completely reframes the narrative for me. It's like discovering your house wasn't built by your grandfather, but by like the neighbor's grandfather who lived across the ocean. And now you're just casually sharing a barbecue with his kids, marveling at the architecture.
Yeah. And speaking of architecture, there is a literal physical scar of this global sacrifice sitting in the city of Malaga, which is not too far from where they were making that paella.
Right.
If you stand in the sun-drenched plaza of Malaga and look at the city's grand cathedral, you'll instantly notice it's entirely asymmetrical. It is literally missing its entire north bell tower.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the locals affectionately call it La Manquita, the one-armed lady.
Because they ran out of stones.
Because they voluntarily emptied their bank accounts.
Wait, what?
Yeah, the parish of Malaga had raised this massive sum of money to finally complete their magnificent cathedral. But Bernardo de Gálvez's uncle happened to be the Spanish foreign minister. He sent out a decree asking for aid, and the people of Malaga took all their construction funds and sent them across the Atlantic to bankroll the American patriot cause.
Are you kidding me?
Nope. And they never raised the money a second time. So that missing bell tower is a permanent stone monument to a foreign sacrifice for American liberty.
That is just the crazy part, is early Americans actually knew this. They knew they owed their survival to Spanish governors and missing bell towers.
Right.
The founders didn't just casually forget this global coalition. They actively chose to bury it. And we know exactly how they did it because the evidence actually survived a devastating fire inside Thomas Jefferson's personal library.
Which is just an incredible piece of historical detective work on Baxter's part.
Oh, absolutely.
We are talking about a monumental, over 1,300-page epic published in 1805 called History of the Rise, Progress, and Termination of the American Revolution. And it was written by Mercy Otis Warren.
Which, I mean, that is staggering in itself. A woman publishing a foundational multi-volume history of a war in 1805.
Yeah.
And her access was entirely unprecedented. She wasn't just relying on secondhand rumors. She was hosting George Washington and the Marquis de Lafayette in her living room.
Imagine those dinner parties.
Right. John Adams was mailing her detailed character studies of the diplomats he was dealing with in Europe. She walked the bloody aftermath of Bunker Hill with Martha Washington. Her perspective was so authoritative that Thomas Jefferson explicitly ordered his entire cabinet to buy her book.
But what Warren documented completely dismantles the neat, tidy mythology of the, self-reliant American Minuteman. She states plainly that the United States was entirely dependent on foreign powers from the very first shot.
And she drops a massive revelation about the Declaration of Independence itself.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
Yeah, we are taught to view it as this high-minded, philosophical treatise on human rights. Right. But Warren explains that it was actually a highly tactical geopolitical lever.
Exactly. Because 18th century European monarchs despised rebellions.
Yeah.
They were terrified of giving their own peasants any idea.
Oh, for sure. A disorganized mob of rebels cannot sign a formal treaty with the King of France. So the Americans had to legally declare themselves a sovereign nation simply to get a meeting.
Right.
The declaration was, at its core, a desperate cry for foreign military aid.
And it worked flawlessly. Once the legal framework was in place, the true scale of the war just exploded. I mean, Warren meticulously documents how the Dutch engaged the British Navy in the North Sea and down in the Caribbean, which stretched British supply lines to the absolute breaking point.
Yeah, they were spread so thin.
And you had the Oneida Nations stepping in as crucial indigenous allies, securing vital victories in New York at Saratoga.
And the conflict spilled all the way into India. I couldn't believe this part. The British decided to open a front in the subcontinent and ran headfirst into the Mysore kingdom. We are talking about an Indian kingdom fielding an army of 90,000 soldiers.
It's massive.
To put that in perspective, George Washington was lucky if he could scrape together 20,000 men on a good day.
Wow.
And the Mysore troops weren't just numerous, they had terrifying technology. They were firing iron-cased rockets. By wrapping the gunpowder in heavy iron instead of paper, it compressed the combustion, creating this high-pressure primitive missile that could fly over a mile.
That's terrifying.
And it would tear right through tight British infantry lines. Combine that with massive war elephants acting as heavy cavalry to just crush morale, and the Mysore kingdom ended up handing the British their single bloodiest defeat of the entire war.
Unbelievable.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I have to push back on the way we maintain our national memory. If Thomas Jefferson knew all of this, if he believed Mercy Otis Warren's book was essential reading for the highest levels of government, why on earth did this incredible reality get replaced by the myth of Paul Revere and the solo farmer? Why hide the war elephants and the Spanish blockades?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really boils down to cognitive dissonance and the desperate need for a unifying national identity.
Okay, how so?
The reality of the war was deeply uncomfortable for the colonists. You had Protestant American soldiers, many of whom were intensely anti-Catholic, suddenly forced to take orders alongside Catholic Frenchmen and Spaniards, the exact same people they had spent decades butchering during the French and Indian War.
Oh, right.
Yeah, Warren herself explicitly noted the ancient prejudices that Americans harbored against their new allies.
So it's exactly like being forced to move into a tiny apartment with your absolute worst arch nemesis, simply because you both happen to hate the landlord.
That is precisely the dynamic. It was an alliance of vastly different religions, languages, and cultures, glued together strictly by the pragmatic need to defeat Great Britain. Once the British surrendered, that glue dissolved.
It just fell apart.
Exactly. It was politically much safer and culturally much more comforting for the fragile new nation to just edit out the awkward foreign dependencies and draft a mythology of American exceptionalism and self-reliance. I mean, Jefferson quite literally categorized Warren's book under memory in his library catalog, and then the nation collectively chose to misplace it.
Wow. But a book doesn't fully explain why they needed that help so badly.
Right.
Why were these fiercely independent Protestant Minutemen forced to hold their noses and beg Catholic monarchs for weapons?
Right.
Because the stark reality of the Continental Army is that they were marching into battle with absolutely nothing. The American Revolution was fundamentally a severe, catastrophic supply crisis.
And this reframes almost every famous early battle we learn about. Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill, Ticonderoga, we view them as noble ideological stands against tyranny. But as Baxter points out, they were practically smash and grab robberies.
Yes.
In late 1774, Britain instituted a total embargo on arms and ammunition heading to the colonies. The Patriots were fighting simply because they had to steal guns to survive.
The logistics are actually terrifying when you dig into it. Take Bunker Hill, the famous command is burned into our brains, right? Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes.
Sure.
We are taught that was about maximizing the accuracy of primitive muskets. The grim reality. They held their fire because the entire Patriot force only had about 30 half barrels of gunpowder left.
That's nothing.
It's nothing. When George Washington arrived to take command of the army in Massachusetts, he ordered a strict inventory. When he read the final tally, he was said to be left completely speechless. His army had an average of 9 rounds of gunpowder per man.
Oh, man.
9 shots to defeat the greatest empire on the planet.
It just highlights a massive structural flaw in the colonies. America had a booming population, timber, and agriculture, but zero military-industrial base.
None.
To make gunpowder, you need 3 ingredients, right? Saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal. Charcoal is easy, you just burn wood. But sulfur requires access to volcanic mining regions, and saltpeter requires massive industrialized composting operations involving vast amounts of manure, carefully managed over many months.
Which sounds lovely.
Right. The colonies simply did not have the infrastructure to manufacture either.
And the weapons themselves were a chaotic nightmare. American gunsmiths could produce a few custom rifles, but Washington needed tens of thousands of standardized weapons.
Yeah, you can't fight a war with bespoke rifles.
Exactly. So instead, he got farmers showing up with their personal fowling pieces, shotguns meant for hunting ducks. The mechanics of 18th century warfare relied on paper cartridges.
Right, the little pre-measured packets.
Yeah. A soldier would bite open a paper tube containing exactly 1 pre-measured charge of powder in a lead ball, pour a little powder in the pan, dump the rest down the barrel, and ram the ball and paper down together. But if the lead ball in the standard cartridge is a .75 caliber and you are holding a .60 caliber bird hunting gun, that ball literally will not fit in your barrel.
That's a huge problem.
You are standing in an open field getting charged by British bayonets, trying to jam a rock into a pipe that is simply too small.
Which raises an important question, right? How do you arm an insurgency that lacks factories, ingredients, and standardization?
Right.
You build a massive international crime ring. Before France formally entered the war, they were quietly clearing out their arsenals of older, perfectly serviceable weapons and selling them at a discount to American merchants. Spain was doing the exact same thing from the Basque Country, which was Europe's premier gun-making hub.
And over 90% of the gunpowder used by the Patriots in those desperate early years was smuggled from Europe. And the Dutch were absolute masters of this.
Oh, the Dutch smuggling operation is incredible.
It's so clever. They would ship massive quantities of gunpowder to the Caribbean island of St. Eustatius. To get past the British blockades, they hid the munitions deep inside wooden chests of tea.
Hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. The British inspectors couldn't pry open thousands of crates to check for powder without exposing the valuable tea leaves to ocean moisture and ruining the cargo. So the Dutch sailed right through. American ships would then sneak into the Caribbean, load up the hidden powder, and run it up to hidden coves in New England.
It was crucial.
It was so vital that Washington authorized the first ever American marine amphibious assault, sending troops down to the Bahamas specifically to steal 200 barrels of gunpowder.
It really is the ultimate startup story, but to an absurd degree.
Yeah, the Continental Army is like a scrappy tech startup trying to overthrow a global monopoly, but they don't own a single computer, they have 0 servers, and their entire business model relies on standing outside their rivals' corporate headquarters, stealing their Wi-Fi password just to send an email.
That's a perfect analogy. And the desperation was palpable. The Patriot leadership knew they couldn't run a war entirely on the backs of Caribbean smugglers and French cast-offs.
Right.
They needed a strategic buffer, a way to protect their vulnerable borders while they waited for a formal European alliance.
And with those stolen guns and smuggled Dutch gunpowder, they do something that completely shatters the myth of the purely defensive, noble patriot. They go on the offensive.
They do.
Before they even draft the Declaration of Independence, they launch a bizarre, highly aggressive invasion of their northern neighbor. They invade Canada.
It is a messy chapter of the war that gets very little attention. To understand the reality on the ground, Baxter travels to upstate New York to meet with Matt Kegel, the curator at Fort Ticonderoga.
Ooh, yeah.
Ticonderoga and forts like Chambly in Quebec were originally built by the French, not for great imperial wars, but to protect the incredibly lucrative fur trade. The cultural entrenchment of that trade was so deep that the French actually petitioned the church to classify the beaver as a fish so they could legally eat it during Lent.
I mean, that is a highly creative theological loophole.
Definitely.
But after the British took over those forts, they left them lightly guarded, which allowed the Americans to capture Ticonderoga in a surprise raid. But holding a fort wasn't enough. They looked north to the massive province of Quebec. And their motivation wasn't just about stealing more cannons, it was driven by intense religious paranoia sparked by the Quebec Act of 1774.
Right, the borders.
Yeah, the British government had massively expanded the borders of Quebec southward. Quebec was overwhelmingly Catholic, French-speaking, and operated without a representative assembly. The Protestant patriots in New England looked at this and panicked. They were utterly terrified that Britain was creating a giant, authoritarian Catholic superstate right on their border, ready to sweep down and crush their liberties.
It was essentially a preemptive strike fueled by xenophobia and strategic dread. Congress authorized the invasion to protect the Canadians from British tyranny, conveniently ignoring whether the Canadians actually wanted their protection. And tactically, the invasion devolved into a chaotic race fueled by pure ego.
It's incredibly absurd. You have Benedict Arnold, who recognizes the strategic need to control Lake Champlain. He captures a schooner and races north with a small crew to raid Fort St. Jean in Quebec. But trailing right behind him is Ethan Allen and his famous Green Mountain Boys.
Ethan Allen.
Yeah, and Allen is consumed by jealousy. He has a severe case of FOMO, fear of missing out on the glory. So while Arnold is sailing up the lake, Allen and his men are furiously, desperately rowing behind him in little rowboats trying to catch up to a schooner.
Which is a brilliant tactical maneuver if your goal is exhaustion and failure.
Exactly. Arnold hits the fort, secures his objective, and sails away. By the time Allen's exhausted men finally row up to the fort, the British alarms have been sounding for hours.
Oh, no.
Reinforcements are marching down from Montreal, and the Green Mountain Boys have to jump right back into their rowboats and flee for their lives. It wasn't glorious, it was a disorganized disaster.
And that chaos is exactly what Matt Kegel, the curator at Ticonderoga, tries to convey through living history. He physically hand-sews historical uniforms and participates in reenactments because he believes reading about a battle just isn't enough.
You have to feel it.
Right. When you are standing in a wool coat, smelling the wood smoke from the campfire, feeling the chafe of the leather gear, and suddenly you are hit by the visceral choking stench of sulfur as gunpowder smoke rolls across the field. That is when the historical footnotes finally talk. It forces an emotional understanding of just how terrifying and disorganized this insurgency really was.
So what does this all mean? When you step back and look at the invasion of Canada, I have to challenge the moral pedestal we put the Founding Fathers on. We are constantly taught they were fighting a purely righteous defensive war for the high-minded ideals of liberty. But the very first major military campaign they launch is a preemptive invasion of a neighboring province to impose their own political will, driven largely by paranoia over borders and a deep-seated prejudice against Catholicism. It feels incredibly ironic and, frankly, hypocritical.
Your pushback is exactly why studying the unfiltered history is so vital. When we strip away the marble statues and the mythology, it reveals the brutal, messy pragmatism of the early war.
Yeah.
These weren't infallible demigods executing a flawless master plan. They were terrified, severely under-resourced humans reacting to crises on the fly. They made aggressive, highly questionable geopolitical moves because they were trying to secure a vulnerable northern flank while simultaneously begging for weapons from the south and east. Survival always trumped high-minded ideals.
And I think that is the ultimate takeaway for you listening right now. We have this profound tendency to view our history as a neat, localized timeline, a straight, inevitable path from Lexington to Yorktown. But the true story of the American Revolution proves that history is a chaotic, deeply interconnected web.
It really is.
You simply cannot understand the birth of American freedom without understanding French arms smugglers, without Spanish governors risking their fleets over sandbars, without Dutch merchants hiding gunpowder in tea chests, and without Indian war elephants draining British resources halfway across the globe. America was a fragile startup that only survived because a diverse global network of foreign powers decided it was in their best interest to invest in us.
Which leaves us with a final, rather profound puzzle to chew on. If the American Revolution was actually won by a volatile alliance of Spanish governors, French monarchs, Dutch merchants, and First Nations tribes, all driven by their own complex global motives, is the very concept of a strictly national history just a convenient illusion?
That's a big question.
If the origin story of a nation is actually a massive, collaborative, global project, how should that change the way we view our international relationships today?
Next time you are sitting in a lawn chair at a 4th of July parade, listening to the snare drums and smelling the black powder, take a second to look at the flagpole. Imagine a giant red and yellow Spanish flag flying over the town square. It might just be a lot closer to the messy, brilliant truth than we ever realized.